there will be a lot of overlap between these presentations. So I will say a lot of the same things that Greg said. I think David will as well, Thomas will as well. So there will be some repetition in here, but I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing. So to start off, we're creating a new website because there's a lot of this stuff going on, different experiments, different groups, different people involved. It's kind of, yeah, again, because Greg has brought it to this point of success, there's now all of a sudden a lot of people involved, and it's difficult to get the full overview. We've got some comments on transparency, so we really want to make sure that there will be one page. As you see, there's already a mock-up. This is in the same style as all of the other pages that are coming up, so Rick will love it, I think, right? So this will have a one-page overview with the reference to all of the prototypes that are there and all of the meeting minutes and everything. So there's nothing secret about what's done. It's just very hard to find in the full tradition of buildingSMART. So we want to try to fix that. So as a tagline, every time I present the IFC 5 work to whoever, this page is in there. I stole it from Thomas, but I think this was Zurich 100 years ago, where it feels. So this adequate functionality, maximum reliability, that is the focus in the back of at least my head constantly when we talk about IFC. Maximum reliability is absolutely necessary. This has consequences. If you want to do maximum reliability, it means that software implementations need to be, it means that the IFC standard definition needs to be predictable enough to be 100% reliable in software implementations. And that means that all of these weird things that are now in scope for IFC and make all of the software implementations really hard and unreliable, they need to get out. So I will now talk for about 20 minutes, half an hour, to constantly basically repeat the message. Beware, this is going to be a lot lighter than the current IFC. There's going to be a lot removed. Forget about textures, forget about whatever. So I'm quite confident that you won't mind this as a first start. So start with a small core, with a good foundation, and then build on top of that later. I will present it in a different way on a summit in Marrakesh, obviously, but this is going to be a communication challenge. So this about maximum reliability, just to give you a perspective of what I mean by that. Usually we have some kind of an authoring tool that creates IFC data. Maybe it adds additional other E57 as well. That seemed to be a red herring in this presentation. So let's focus on IFC first. That's being sent to some kind of a processing tool, simulation tool, whatever, could be anything. There's a user on the authoring tool side because that needs kind of human intelligence to design something. That's the whole reason why we're trying to do this. But the processing tool should be able to process the data without human intervention and without human intelligence. That is this maximum reliability. Tool should be able to process everything reliable and predictable without a human having to tweak the settings. And then there's a result back, maybe to the authoring tool, maybe directly to the end user, whatever. So think about, I'm making a design, I'm sending it to an online cloud simulation for CO2 emissions, whatever. I do not have to go into that tool again to tweak it and to fine tune it. I don't have to hire a consultant to do that. I should be able to get that feedback within minutes. That's currently not possible, and it's mainly because this link of IFC into the automated processing is just really, really hard. So that's the focus for IFC 5. How do you get this IFC 5 data to be predictable and reliable so it can be automatically processed by tools? So this is what we mean by maximum reliability. Yeah, again, if there's any questions or comments, just shout, right? I know this is difficult on recording, but still. So this predictable processing, receiving software needs to understand it, needs to be clarity, there needs to be one obvious way to do things, not 5 ways to define a wall, just one way. not two different ways to define an alignment, just one way. Why would you need two ways? All of this is just adding this extra layers of complexity to the current IFC that is really not helping in the reliability of actually processing the data. It works in the current use cases where we open the data in a viewer and we view it manually as a person, and then still it's sometimes hard to process. But this is just unacceptable if you want automated processing.
Is the consequence of that the IFC 5 caters to the lowest common denominator to reach the kind of stakeholder?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like mesh is no.
For the first version, yeah. Let's start there. And there's already discussions about some kind of more intelligent geometry as well, but not the weird stuff that is currently in IFC.
But yes, across the standard, one obvious way to do things means it has to be the way that caters to the broadest group, which means it has to be the least restrictive.
Yeah.
You basically end up
that's where we start. Yeah.
So the way you're speaking about this, it still seems like it's an import-export operation, right? You're saying I'm authoring something and sending an IFC file to someone else.
I'm not sure I used those words. If I did, it wasn't the intent. We produce data. That data has to go into some kind of a processing tool. I don't care how you do that. It can be an API, it can be a file, it can be whatever.
Well, but that's my point, though. It still seems like it's A to B. When I think of the granular data, et cetera, right? I think of A to a storage place where many things can use whatever parts.
Fine. I'm really not interested. I'm sorry. So this tool needs to have some kind of needs to read the data to be able to process it. I don't care where it comes from. It can be a direct API connection, it can be a binary stream of data, can be a file.
But we're just really on if there's a hub in between the two, that doesn't fundamentally change.
Right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be directly from authoring tool to here. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, of course.
Okay.
We could pick at this diagram, but we should.
No.
Thank you for that.
I wanted to make sure that the hub aspect is important.
That's a good point actually. The hub aspect is important. We should support it, but this should also work without the hub.
Sure.
Otherwise, we're basically creating some kind of a lock-in that we also don't want. So this is indeed a very simplified version. Thank you for appreciating that, Dennis. But the message I want to convey here is that however the data comes in here, this needs to be able to automatically process it without human intervention. So that's the challenge. And yes, CDE, whatever. Yeah, that's really not. I think I kind of assumed we were past that point. So easy to implement. This is usually where I get the most responses from the audience when I say should be able to implement IFC 5 in a couple of days. I always get these kind of reactions. That's the benchmark. I mean, if it's a week, I'm happy as well. But the current IFC, I think sometimes I say it takes 6 months to implement and then it's still not reliable. Some people laugh at me because they've been on it for 6 years and still haven't nailed it yet. So this is more like a benchmark. Could be a couple of days, could be a week, but definitely should not be a couple of months. Then something's wrong. Then it's not a predictable data scheme. And I'm positive that, like I said, if we follow a strategy where we start with just some core functionalities, this should be able to be done in a couple of days. Yes, this will grow on later, and we will have additional modules on top of that, and then it gets a little bit more work. But predictability. If you have a predictable standard, it doesn't have to be very difficult to implement. So that's the goal. And then also important, it needs to be one standard. Apparently, I can't call it an exchange standard, data model. You all get the point. I don't have to explain this to you. But this is not just for this coordination use case. This is what I talked about yesterday as well. It needs to be one IFC. You can use it for your use case or not. We're not going to make separate kind of slightly deviating MVDs that are not the same and not interoperable. You have one IFC, it works or it doesn't. Find out the different standard for a different use case. We're not going to make this slightly different IFCs just to facilitate a use case that should never have been in scope. Right, still no one leaving the room. That's good. So the challenge for building smart is to do the hard work to make it easy for others. And I kind of have a feeling that this is the complete opposite of what has been done for the last 10 years, where you just put something new into the schema and just create some kind of weird MVD, because then some vendors don't have to look at it and others do. So you kind of, as building smart, choose the easy way out, don't make the hard decisions, and then vendors are basically screwed because there's no one single standard and it's not reliable. So the challenge for IFC 5 is that we make the hard decisions, and we really have to tell our community that no, they can't do textures and have to use some other standard for that. But at least the ones that are using IFC can use it much more reliable. So yes, that means that there is a focus on the minimal possible solution as a start. We need to deliver not just this data model, but also an API and a set of rules. So it's not just dumping the schema over the fence and figure it out. And what is not for building smart is how you guys implement it. That should be up to you. We really don't want to come up with these more complex solutions. And again, the result of this is that we cannot have 100% coverage of all use cases. We need to set a clear scope and say, this is in scope for IFC. There's this history of people coming up with money to building smart and say, can this inside IFC, here's money. And the answer is always yes. We need to change that attitude and to say, we'll take the money anyway, but the answer is no. Yeah, the same specifically, I think this was also mentioned before, the solutions that already work. There are also already so many really cool standards for rendering, point clouds, alignment. We shouldn't have to reinvent that and augment that into IFC, just use that as is and connect to that. That seems to be a bit of a red herring in the discussion from Greg. So this is something that we look at as a principle, and there's a lot of questions around it, but let's get the IFC part nailed first. Then a bit about these use cases, because like I said, this has implications. We do want to have new use cases in here, like this incremental update, shared authorship, automated processing, and also better way of doing types or typicals, however you want to call it. So I always have the example of when you have a door type now that is used 200 times, when you click it, there's only that one thing that you can click. You cannot individually select the glass or the wood or the panels. That is something that we would like to have. That's like a common request. So that means that the IFC types in a file need to become much more like compositions or different ways of how to handle it today. So these are kind of the new challenges that we have. A lot of them are solved with ECS, but not all of them. The ones that we need to drop for now is this rendering, like I said, textures. Nobody really uses that anyway. Cost and scheduling is currently a completely separate branch of IFC that is separate from all of the product things. That should not be separate. So the way it has been done now, we need to drop. We need to figure out later how to get cost and scheduling in a more consistent way. Style of representation as well. I think there was an example yesterday that you put inside IFC how it should be represented. That's I think something that also needs to be our scope for the first version. And definitely there's more parametric complex geometry, so simple geometry in the first version. I think Thomas is already presenting some of the extrusion ideas as well, right, that we have. So yes, we know that we need to go beyond just simple geometry, but for the first version, let's make sure that simple geometry works.
But are we understanding you correctly that we're not going much further beyond the first step? Because if we went further beyond the first step, we'd violate the rule of there should only be one obvious way to do things, right?
I think the experiment that Thomas did on more not parametric but more precise geometry is very nice and lean and can be implemented reliable. But that's my opinion. So let's wait the presentation first and see what you think.
So general question here as well, obviously the IFC 5 must allow for these other ones in a nice, elegant way. Even though we're not looking at it right now, it might be, coming down the pipe very soon.
Yeah.
And if you look at like rendering, with the whole texture thing, let's call it materials, look at, physics-based simulations, material properties is important.
Yeah, material properties are in there.
Got it.
Yeah. And again, so this is not, there's a reason why the for now default. Let's get the core figured out first and then build modular extensions later on. But I think that's already a big change. I mean, we're used to making one big standard and then dumping that and sending it to ISO. Let's do the core first, and then we have these modular extensions later that we can still also send to ISO as separate ISO parts. I'll come back to that later. So this is for now. So let's focus on the first parts now. And then also potential additional use cases in the future. There is this idea to also integrate IDS and BCF into this IFC5 framework. Because if you're exchanging components, it can be anything. We can also add a component that defines information requirements or defines the different issues. So that means that IDS, BCF, and IFC would have the same kind of structure and would be much more integrated. And I am aware that this is also a red herring for most of you, so I'll move on quickly. And yes, of course, also we do all of the binary stuff and JSON and all of the fancy stuff. But I tend to keep on focusing on, let's make sure that we have this automated processing, predictability, better array of types, incremental updates. How do you do that first? Because that's part of the data model. And yeah, we can create an API later. That's not really a problem. So base principles of IFC, I should have split up this slide into multiple parts. This is a lot of text. Multiple authors can contribute to this shared data set. I'm trying to avoid to call it a model or a file or whatever. I think you get the point. You at some point you compose a data set, and there's different authors that have contributed to that. Geometry and any kind of data basically are stored unambiguously. So there's really one way how to do things. Ease of implementation for both the geometry and any kind of other data. Like we discussed before, there's reference data. How do you do a point cloud E57 in IFC5 is indeed, I think, in scope for buildingSMART. We're not going to redefine a point cloud, but how do you connect a point cloud in this IFC5 environment is something that is in scope for us. Again, this ability to integrate, I mean, if you can connect E57, we can easily also connect information requirements or issues and clashes to this. So that should be an easy, quick win as well. Modular data schemas, express libraries of objects that can be placed in a data set. I'm going over this quickly because I think David has almost exactly the same list. We have to think about these library objects as well. Reusing one door 200 times are kind of the typical IFC things that you don't necessarily easily find in other standards. So that's a challenge. And obviously at the bottom, provide these incremental updates. So what does it mean for IFC5 version 1? I'm struggling with the naming here. So the next generation IFC version 1 or IFC5, I don't know how to call it. So I would really like to focus again on this core first, just simple geometry first, preferably something existing like the OBJ or as David will claim, some USD library. Only one way to do placement. I think we're kind of moving towards the conclusion to do relative placement of objects. So that means we would have a relative placement tree. Control data to check. I put that in there, but I don't know what it means. Yeah. So when you have this relative placement tree, you have a relative position to another object, but there's also this, I think, 5-year or 10-year-old idea to then also have the placement to the origin point to check if you render the placement tree to see if the actual end position of relative placement is the same from the origin as the original one. So it's the same with geometry. You can put in a lot of geometry calculations, and then you also add a property with how many expected triangles there will be, for example. Assembly of components, I think, has been discussed a lot already. Data can be in 1 file or in 100 files, that really doesn't matter. Starting with a limited number of classes and properties again, I think that was also what we saw yesterday. Let's start with just 50 classes and 100 properties to get this working. The result of the principal decision to do components is that anyone can just add a component to a data set. So anyone can add another component of fire rating that is different than the one you added. So how are you going to deal with that? Which one is correct? How are you going to render that? For properties, you can still just show both of them, but what do you do with geometry? Are you also rendering that? So these are kind of the questions that need to be tackled in these first experiments. Updates are the same as static data sets. I think is also very important. So if you see data, it can be an update of an overrule of something that was there previously, or it can be just your data. I don't think we should have this separate system for change set or static information. So that should be one and the same structure, and obviously this clear split of authorship. So thank you for hanging in this long text. Yes.
So these updates are the same as static data sets. Would that mean that update is full file, or I'm just thinking like, can you do like incremental? So can you, if you change the value of a property, then would you need to export the full data set, or okay?
No, you create components with that.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I
won't say I'm a bit insulted by this question, Pasi, but come on.
well, I think that it's good to be that clear.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, that's not my.
Yeah, again,
Yeah.
I thought we were past that point already.
Yeah.
We're not going to do full exports for just a single update.
Yeah.
Just do one component, export it as one thing. If you want to do the full export again, for all I care, if you want to do that, that's also fine. But there is the option to just do that one component, yeah, of course. Did you have a comment, Thomas?
I just have some examples later.
Yeah. All right. So law of text, thanks for hanging in there. So as a timeline, I think that we like I said, I'm kind of skipping over a lot of these basic questions because I have a feeling we already did this scope and principles part that feels stable. It feels that I don't have to explain anymore, that we're moving away from this export file import kind of stuff. So again, apologies if I assumed that everyone was on board with that already, but I actually still assume we are. So now we're kind of moving into this prototypes way forward decision. I think we're probably somewhere here. So I kind of hope that in the discussion later on today, we can make a decision of this way forward. And again, with the focus on these new use cases. So I really want to focus on how are we going to define these typical doors that are being used 200 times, but not like we do today, where you then can only select the full thing and not the individual parts anymore. How are we going to do alignment placement in one way instead of 6, those kind of things. So I feel we are there, but I will hold my breath until the end of this meeting today. And then, around here comes the big funding gap, because then the experiments need to become actual things that we can test and continue development and bring to ISO, et cetera, but that's the challenge that we have. So I kind of had a reminder for myself to stop talking here and show the demo. Hand over to David. I will quickly show you the slides that I have as a backup for later on, because I'm kind of anticipating questions. And again, I think this is where we kind of are. We have a drastically cut down lightweight version of IFC5 that need to be tested first by you, and then we can do a public beta of this really first stripped down version. If that's accepted, we can start thinking about an API, and we can release that API and then decide the next feature. And then we have a slightly more, but still lightweight version. So I would really like to treat this as a kind of a continuous development. We can add domain modules as well at some point, because someone wants to do a stationing extension. That's fine. And even this IDS and BCF can also be added later on. So let's do one thing at a time. I have this side note about the core and the different modules. We're actually also in discussion with ISO at the moment to make sure that we can deliver the ISO parts of IFC more gradually as well, instead of in one bulk. So what you will get in this delivery is that this IFC5 core and resources comes first. So this will be part 10 of the IFC standards. We have to make some kind of agreements on serialization. I understood that was also a hearing. I think we've got Jason for now, but how to do these things with Jason is something that we need to agree on as well before we can actually test it. API core extensions. So how do you do E57? Maybe even a core extension on if you want to use this for architecture or structural, so that doesn't all have to be part of the core. Other kind of extensions, so this is how we define how do you do point clouds like E57, how do you do IDS and BCF, and then further domain extensions where all the domains can go wild and add thousands of properties again, but at least nobody really has to support that anymore. So if this looks familiar, that's because it is. I think most of you have already seen the similarity with this step standards, where you have step part 21 as a file format, 22 as the API, performance tests are in the 30s, and then generic resources are in the 40s, like 42 as a geometry. So you have these different parts of the ISO standard, so 10303. And this is also what we want to do with IFC. So we're also turning this 16739 IFC standard into separate parts. For those of you who have an eye for detail, might have noticed that the last IFC 403 standard was part 1. So that was already to kind of clear the way for a part 2 and a part 10 and a part 20, etc.
Again, I have a question, on the process for the principle, a few slides back, so I don't want to stop you there, but so where we are here and where the funding gap is, a lot of the stuff is sort of, are those principles in scope and, set in stone, because a lot of the stuff is possibly going to be, we should be able to question those things backwards if we actually start.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, but again, I think everything will come together after David and Thomas' presentation. So, like I said, we have 4 or 5 experiments in the last 10 months, and this is constantly going back and re-questioning the principles. So the reason we're presenting this now is because we kind of feel they're really stable, and we also kind of feel that these 4 experiments are kind of going into the same direction. And yes, so that's also why we're here now. And this way forward decision proof of concept is something that we also hope you would contribute to. So this testing of what we have now is something that really needs to be done. And then if you guys found out there's still some voids and some things missing, then of course we need to go back. But I feel a bit uncomfortable to kind of make the leap to this API developments before you guys have tested what we have now. All right, I'm running out of time, so I'll stop. So again, I hope this message that I constantly try to reiterate on adequate functionality, maximum reliability is coming through. I think I did a presentation about 2 years ago where I said if you have 100% use cases in scope, the reliability becomes 0, and if you have 80% of the use cases in scope, the reliability is 100%. So the challenge for us on a buildingSMART side is to really define a clear scope where we say, this is in scope, this is what we want to support with 100% reliability. If someone comes in with a use case, the challenge is to say, this is really out of scope for IFC, use some other kind of standard that is existing for this. Or we can add it to scope, but only if it does not affect the implementation reliability. So yeah, as the principle, more from a buildingSMART perspective, I think this is a big culture change as well that I'm sure you're happy to help with. All right, so that was my part. I can come back to the timeline and incremental releases and ISO parts later, because I assume there will be questions about that, but I think it would be good to, I have a nice set of slides to hand over to you, David. So like I said, we have this idea of components, we have some kind of prototype, we have these principles, and those are listed. Those were listed on this long text slide that I had earlier. And it would be really scary if no one else was following these same kind of principles, if these ideas were kind of completely new, because in these days, if you invent something that nobody else did, that's usually a red flag. So I'm quite happy actually that we did find that there was something else that also had the same principles. It was just for us quite hard to find, and David helped us by pointing that out, very precise, telling that there were different words being used, but it was actually the same. So yeah, it's also the risk when you tell someone at buildingSMART, when you educate something, then you're being invited for a presentation. So David, Rick knows about that as well. So David has kind of half an hour to convince all of us that the principles that we have for IFC5 are not unique and are out there in other parts as well. Or are there any questions?